Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us again for this week's edition of Navigating the New Normal. We're so glad to have our counselors from Summit Counseling, as today our topic is going to be, well, the new normal. I mean, how do you navigate things coming back? And so I want to begin, though. We have Don Waller back with us today, and then Mike Traylor is with us today. And so, Mike, since you're new to our audience here, I want to, if you will, to just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and some of your specialties at Summit Counseling.
Okay. I've been working at Summit Counseling since 1998 and interned there through Mississippi College in Clinton.
Yeah.
And I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, so most of the counseling I do is around couples and families.
Right.
I also do have some emphasis on anger issues, particularly with men and that kind of thing, and focus in on, and operate the Employee Assistance Program, which we have some businesses that have partnered with Summit to do an employee assistance programs, and so I kind of head that up as well.
Great. My understanding is you're the longest tenured counselor that we have at Summit Counseling.
I keep hearing that today. It's been a running theme. I guess I've got the white hair, which gives that away, but yeah, it's been a joy to be here. It's been a privilege, and I have so much respect for the church that's provided us an opportunity to reach people where they are, and try to, come alongside them in whatever their struggles are.
Well, we appreciate what you do. And so, guys, kind of for today, we want to think about transitioning back into, I guess, what used to be normal. We've called this navigating the new normal, so we're in a new normal now, but we've realized from the very beginning it wouldn't last forever. And so we've seen on TV and in the news in the last week where the president has kind of begun the process of bringing the country back to work, kind of a rollout in phases and even gates that lead to the phase. And then, of course, our governor, in his press conference last week, though we're still in a shelter-in-place for another week, he's certainly given us every indication that his intentions are to begin to roll things out, maybe in phases. And so people will be getting back to work some. People will begin to kind of transition back into what life was like before all this shelter-at-home stuff. And so a question that we were asked last week and that I want to bring to you now is, we've been in this new normal now for, 5-6 weeks. And so now we've kind of developed a new habit. Now this has become our normal, and there are a lot of aspects about the way things are that we really like. We've heard reports about people being home more, having more family time, having more time even with spouses, kind of getting to know each other again. Dinner around the table, family game nights, and all of those things. Working from home, that though we've talked about some of the challenges, there have been some good aspects to that as well. Exactly. How do we prepare now for another new normal? How do we prepare for going back to work and going back to regularly scheduled things that we've been without for the last 6 weeks?
Chip, I think that's a good question to ask, not only us as therapists, but as the country decides, okay, what will be my new normal? Will I go back into the same job? Will I go back and work as hard as I did before? Or have I learned something through connecting with those in my family and having more relationship time? Is there something that I want to do different? But I think it always begins with having a conversation. What will that look like?
Okay.
The other piece I would add to that is that it's going to be a transition, just like any transition. So probably anything that we can do to try to get back to some normalcy in our lives, routine things that we did before. If you're working from home right now, you might be wearing shorts and a t-shirt because you can do that because you're not having to be in front of anybody. But maybe, the week before, that things are going to open back up. Maybe get up, get dressed like you would if you normally go to work, kind of get your mind back on track to this new normal that we're going to be facing. But I do think things are going to be different. Just like when 9/11 happened, things kind of changed. And I think things are going to change here too. But I think anything that we can do will probably give us a sense of control if we're doing some routine things that we normally were doing before, that we can pick back up and begin to do those things again.
So kind of practice being back to
Exactly.
normal in a sense.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Listen, I want to say to those of you who are watching at home that I'm sorry you would think 6 weeks into this I'd have this down pat, but I forgot to tell you that you can text in your question. You'll see a number that's up on the screen, and you can send us questions, which I can ask these guys live right here on this webinar. Your question will be anonymous. Nobody will see your name pop up if you use that text message option. So please send us your questions. So now let's talk about work for just a second, because some people, unfortunately, with things being shut down, probably have lost their jobs. Maybe some folks were business owners and things have dried up, and it may be impossible, unfortunately, for some of those things to come back. And so what about the person who might be considering a career change? What advice would you give to a person who's just kind of in limbo, and as the nation is coming back to normal, they're not real sure what that normal is going to look like for them economically or certainly vocationally?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question, because I think all of us are different in what we want to do to support our families. And putting your resume together, pulling that out and checking it and saying, okay, you need to update it. And I think updating your resume and thinking and talking with your spouse, if you're married, what is it something that I would love to do different that I'm not doing now, especially if you're out of work. And sometimes making use of whatever you can make money with. And so sometimes that's going out and cutting grass. Sometimes that's going and helping somebody. And we talked about that during this new normal, is really looking toward other people's needs and meeting needs there. But as far as a job and what's going on, I think that's a matter of prayer, and I think that's a matter of conversation with those that are close to you.
You know, I guess the other piece, I think that's great. What I would add to that is that I think it's going to be really important to know that you're resilient. Because I think resiliency is going to be something that's going to be real important for us. And knowing what your strengths are.
Yes.
Do you want to work with people, or do you want to work with things, or do you want to do both? And kind of knowing what your strengths are, it's a good time to maybe reevaluate on this pause that we've been on. I guess, I have compassion for the people that have a small business that have been shut down during this time, because it's going to be real hard for them just to try to pick it right back up where they left off, because business was doing real well in our country really before this event occurred. But I think that knowing what your strengths are, tapping into those, realizing that you're resilient. If you started a business, you were resilient already, because you don't start a business without having some gumption and get up and go, and realizing maybe taking advantage of new opportunities that might be happening as a result of the changes that are happening right now through going through this COVID crisis.
You mentioned two words that I want to come back to, and I want to think through a little bit. You used the word family, and you used the term, I think Mike used the term reevaluate. So let me ask you a couple of questions as it pertains to reevaluating family, okay? So let's think about the mom and dad who, because of the new normal during the pandemic, spouses, maybe their workload has lessened, or at least they've been able to work from home. Now, when things open up and they go back to the office, the 8 to 5 may end up becoming an 8 to 7 or an 8 to 8. I mean, the demand for things at work may be bigger than they were. And so for the couple who's enjoyed for the last 6 weeks maybe a little bit more family time than they had before, and now it's fixing to possibly be the complete opposite, what would you say to that couple? And then we'll talk about children in a minute, but what would you say to that couple who life's fixing to just turn upside down again?
Well, I mean, one thing I would say is that you need to have some boundaries established on some things that you've done right. Okay, if through this process your family has gotten closer because you're eating around the table or you're spending more family and quality time, well, why not keep that going? That's something positive that's happened through these circumstances that you can kind of continue to navigate. So it's a good time for couples, particularly with their family, to reevaluate their values and their priorities. And companies, if you're working for a company, sometimes now they want you accessible 24/7. either through cell phone or text, and it might be a good opportunity to start put some boundaries up on those things and saying, hey, we're going to shut things down 6:30 or 7 o'clock or whatever time it is, and we're going to have family time and realize we're not going to work during that time. And I really feel like if you're doing a good job for whoever you're working for, they'll probably respect those boundaries. My hope would be that they would probably.
You know, the word that comes to mind is flexibility. To be flexible, because you don't know what that new normal is going to be. But I do believe there's going to be some high expectations. And you need to go into going back to work with the kind of expectations that you can live with, that your family needs. And I agree with Mike wholeheartedly that the family times around the table needs to be something that you need to continue.
Yeah. Coming to children now. I have 3 kids, 2 of them are in college, 1 of them's in high school, and so we're kind of transitioning stage of life at our house. But there was a time when all 3 of them were in the home and all 3 of them were young. Sports schedules were just crazy, and so it seemed to be all year long. There were practices, there were games, and we were going from this field to that field, and the schedule seemed to be insane. Well, I know that a lot of our younger families, that's kind of the stage of life that they're in right now. However, for the last 6 weeks, they hadn't been in that.
That's right.
The last 6 weeks, it's been family dinners around the table, it's been family game nights, family movie nights, and they're just not as, well, worn out going from one field to another. Now that things begin to roll out, some of those things will eventually come with it. So for the parent who's going, you know, I kind of like not being gone every night at a ball field or a dance studio. I don't know if I want to go back to normal. What advice would you give to the parent who's going to have to make some decisions? Because before you know it, we can be right back in the position we were in before of being stressed out and worn out if we don't prepare for that. So what advice would you give to the parent dealing with that?
I would recommend reassessing what is important to them. Know what their values are. Talk about it with your spouse, and then sit down with their children and talk about it. And then find out with some other peers what they're going to do. Because I think really this is the time that you can make a decision and set it and say, hey, we're just going to do 1 sport per season, per child. Or you know, hey, we're going to do swimming. If we're going to do swimming in the evening, then we're not going to play basketball. We're not going to do soccer. And so I think really overcommitting has really been our Achilles heel in America. And we feel like if we're not doing this for our children, then we're not being a good parent.
You know, I'd also say, going along with that, you know, that kind of lifestyle is almost like a rat race.
Yes.
Right? You're
Yes,
just on
it
that
is.
wheel, and it's spinning and spinning and spinning. And, you know, I keep thinking about Psalm 23, where the second verse says, God says, you know, He'll make us lie down in green pastures, right? And so this has been maybe for some people a time of rest, and maybe even for the family a time of rest. And maybe that part's been something positive that's happened through this experience. And I think it might make more of a priority for families to try to have that family time and have that quality time, and maybe streamline some things that they were doing before that they can let go of. And I think it's a great time to give yourself permission to do that, to reevaluate, like Don said, those values and priorities.
Well, we keep saying that there are lessons to be learned when life is disrupted. And so I guess what I'm hearing you say is now's the time to be kind of talking through those lessons that we've been learning.
Exactly.
And reassessing, reevaluating how we've been living, and so that we don't fall back into the same rat race we were in before. Yeah. Here's a question that I'm hoping has not come from one of our employees here at First Baptist Jackson. They won't admit it if they did, but it's a good question. This viewer says, if I feel more productive in this season, particularly of working from home, how can I talk to my boss about maybe extending this work from home option?
I think asking him first, can he prove that he's more productive? can he prove the benefits of him working at home, and try to sell them all. Maybe not full time, maybe part time, a couple of days a week at home and a couple of days a week in the office.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I think companies are probably going to realize through this process, because I mean, you know, some of them that have maybe 800 employees and they've sent half of them home to work from home, and
Right.
and they're finding that they can be just as productive. I think you're going to see that lifestyle change for us as a country, and you know, people are on Zoom or, you know, different ways they're communicating through Skype and that kind of thing. So there might be more opportunities for people to maybe be more open to that, and the companies to be more open to that, particularly like Don says, if you can prove your productivity and that you're still getting more done. I've heard several people tell me, I'm getting more done from home because there's less distractions.
Absolutely.
Nobody's coming up to me, nobody's coming into my office, nobody's distracting me or asking me a question. And so I guess it presents more of ability to be able to focus. But the flip side of that too would be, with some people need the structure, and some people might need to show up at a job and
Right.
be there for them to be focused, and when they're home they might be more distracted. So
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of that depends on the personality, but I do think you're going to see a cultural change that's going to happen in the corporate environment going through this time frame and the crisis that we're going through right now.
That's a good statement. I have been reading a lot about how the old 8 to 5 is kind of a thing of the past, and that particularly younger workers today seem to do better in less structured environments. But what I hear you saying is the key is productivity. Being
Exactly.
able to show productivity and being able to verify that. And of course, productivity versus accountability, that's
That's right.
Right, that's a good point.
that's kind of where an employee would have to weigh that, I guess, with their boss. We've talked about the person going back to work, we've talked about parents, we've talked about children. Let's talk about an aspect of a family that we don't talk about quite as much, and that's the older adult. So let's say an adult in the workplace is nearing retirement. Well, the last 6 weeks maybe have been kind of a preview of what retirement might look like. And that older adult might not like what he or she sees. And so now coming back into the workplace, you're talking about reevaluating. It's an opportunity for a person to, one, reevaluate when they really want to retire, and certainly two, reevaluate what life expectations after retirement are going to be like. What advice would you give to a person in that boat?
Well, a couple of things I would hit on that is that, you know, I don't see the word retire in Scripture. Okay,
Yeah,
if I
it's a
look
great
in the
point.
Bible, I don't see it in there.
Absolutely
So,
right.
I mean, if you're going to transition from your employment and maybe restrain from doing that, if this has been a pause for you where, hey, you're probably going to find out one or two things. Either I like this idea, maybe not working like I have been, or you're realizing I'm not going to be able to do this. I'm going to have to stay busy doing something. Okay, it might be either way. But I would encourage people to find purpose and meaning in whatever it is they're doing. And whether that's volunteer work, if it's a time to transition to that, maybe doing something they'd never thought about doing that they always desired to do. It might be a great time to do that. But I really think people that have purpose and meaning in their lives, regardless of what their age is, they're going to have a more happy and fulfilled life. And of course, as Christians, God gives us a lot of reasons to have purpose and meaning.
That's
and,
right.
Right, and a lot of that's going to be reaching others and helping others. And so I don't know, that word retirement is kind of scary to me because I feel I get this picture of somebody being put on a shelf and like, you know, but maybe transitioning to doing some things that you'd always dreamed about doing would maybe be a better way of looking at that.
Right, and just to go along with that, I think we spend most of our careers saving money for retirement, and we don't work on our relationships. And I think being around your spouse for these last 6 weeks could be an indicator how that's going to go. Not that you come home and sit down and be around each other, but going from the workplace to being more at home and around each other is a transition. And so maybe you do need to come do a checkup in front of a counselor and talk about some of the communication or lack thereof of communication. But I think for most of us as believers, when we connect with those that we love and feel that connection, that acceptance, that, you know, I think God intended it wasn't good for man to be alone, so he made a suitable helpmate. And that helpmate is to help us do life together. And I think experiencing that more these last 6 weeks has encouraged me in seeking God and saying, God, you designed this way for us to live the best way we can live by connecting and reaching out to others. And you talk about volunteering work. I mean, we've got a food drive going on right now at First Baptist that you can come and bring food to those through Mission First that we can meet some needs.
You know, you reference meaning and purpose, and then you also reference we were made for connection. Don't you think that particularly now, not just the fact that we're in this new normal, but also the fact that we're kind of probably beginning to transition out of it, now's the time to really assess, what is it that makes me happy in life? Am I really content? Because as you said, we get so busy with our normal, so busy with work, so busy with taking kids to soccer practice or baseball games or dance recitals, so busy that meaning and purpose in some way seems a little aloof for us. And the definition of happiness and contentment a lot of times is just, well, 30 minutes of peace of mind, or everybody getting along, or having the proverbial enough. And so what would you say about that? I mean, wouldn't you agree that this is kind of a time to really assess and reevaluate, am I really happy? Am I really content with the way things are? And what changes do I need to make in my life to go in that direction?
Exactly. So my lesson Sunday was about idols and how God has designed it that if we put anything in front of Him, it's not going to satisfy. It's not going to bring us the contentment we need. Only when we have God first and spouse second and work third do we find that contentment and that peace and that joy that only comes from knowing the Lord and doing life His way.
Yeah.
Well, and what you're saying is very biblical in the aspect. Scripture says, godliness with contentment is great gain.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
And so what great way to try to gain something during this, even in the midst of maybe losing some things. There might be some things we lose, but there also may be opportunities for things that we can gain through this. And I do think it's, you know, not only for believers in Christ, but those that don't know Christ, they're asking a lot of questions right now. And I just think it's going to present opportunities for us to be able to present Jesus and the gospel to people, probably more so than we've had in a long, long time, because, I mean, this has rocked everybody just about on the planet. And people are going to have questions and concerns, and I just think it's going to present a lot of opportunities for us as we come out of this.
And that's as far as how we handle things,
Yeah.
how we make adjustments ourselves,
That's right.
as well as giving a defense for the things that we believe, as Scripture teaches us. Mike, this is a question that's right up your alley. I don't know if you caught it earlier, but Mike does a lot of counseling in the workplace and for people who are working, and some of the issues around the office. But here's a question that was submitted. As a manager, how do I balance the desire to have a productive team versus making sure they are mentally healthy through this transition? I want them to be productive, but I want to be mindful of their mental health as we transition again.
Wow, that's a great question. You know, I think one of the things I would suggest in that is maybe having some wellness meetings, possibly, you know, where you just talk about, hey, where's everybody at? Or where are you physically or emotionally? Or how are you coping with things? Or maybe asking the question, hey, what's the hardest thing right now for you as an employee going through this time? And having some awareness. Obviously, a manager asking that question has concern and care for their employees. And so that relationship with them is going to be so vital, I think, going through this time as well. But, you know, there's things that you could do, lunch and learns and that kind of thing, possibly as a manager. I don't know if the company that you work for would allow you to do that, but where you come in and just have a time where people talk about different aspects of wellness or wholeness, and you know, kind of evaluating where people are at. But I think it's a great way to create dialogue and discussion, either individually or even as a group, either one. If you have a good team, that you can open the team up talking that way with each other, I think communication would be the key on that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I think all of us experience, and certainly with our teams of people that we work with, you begin to see kind of a COVID-19 fatigue.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, and really though, our government leaders, I think, are being very wise and prudent, and as Christians, we're to pray for our government leaders. And it's a difficult spot. You know, it's everybody's an expert in what they don't do, right? And so everybody knows what we should do until you're the person having to make those decisions. And I can't imagine what it must be like to have to make the decisions they're having to make. But because of so much uncertainty and the fluidity of information that comes in, nobody can just say, everything's going to be back to normal May 15th.
Right.
You know, so you're kind of hanging on with every press conference, and every new edition of the newspaper to find out, where are we today? Am I going to be able to go back to work next week? Is it going to be 2 weeks? How much time am I going to know? And so when fatigue begins to set in, that absolutely can have a negative effect on productivity.
Sure.
So how would you guide a business manager, for instance, in the scenario I just gave you, in helping to keep people's spirits up as we're all just fatigued?
You know, the other piece of that I probably should have mentioned, I think it's important at this point to not have really high expectations.
Yes.
Because if you have high expectations, expectations can sometimes present disruption or negative feelings. So I think, and it's probably going to be hard, especially for a manager that wants things to be productive, but I think you probably got to cut loose a little bit on your expectations of what the new normal is going to be, okay? And the other piece of that, I would say, for as a manager to the employees, it's going to be real important to be kind of psychologically flexible. And what I mean by that is that you're going to have good days and bad days. You're going to have days that are going to seem really strange. I think it's going to be really, the word I keep using, it's going to be really weird coming out of this, because this whole thing's been kind of weird. And I think psychological flexibility, lowering expectations, I think those are two things I would say that might be helpful for somebody in a group or people in the work environment coming out of this.
Yeah.
And I think I would tell that manager, supporting his employees will be so important right now. In fact, that would be just having a pulse of where they are and checking in on them and just supporting them and saying, we know this is difficult, we're all trying to figure this out. But on a personal level, for me, I think journaling has always helped me in prayer time, as I'm giving it to God and saying, God, you know what's going on, because I'm not in control of all this. And the more I try to figure it out, the more anxious and the more stress I feel. But just really just laying it at the foot of the cross every day and saying, God, you got this. And doing what I can do is the next best thing today is to focus on today, where I can be healthy and as productive as I can be. To my wife, to my children, to my job.
Well, one last question. Our time's running short. It's amazing how quickly it goes by each and every week. But as things begin to roll back into normal for, I guess, particularly the parent, or maybe even the senior adult who, you know, it's kind of like just putting your toe in the water to see what the temperature's like. You know, we want to get back to normal, but how do you know? You know, how do I know when it's okay to go back to church? How do I know when it's okay for my kid to play with his friends? How do I know it's okay to go back to the store without wearing a mask or gloves? How do you deal with the anxiety of coming back, and the fear that maybe I'm going to fall back into where I was before? How do you deal with that? The unknown.
Well, I think just admitting that you're anxious about it, that you don't know, and saying, and God's not asking us to figure this out. He's asking us to trust Him. And I think that's so important, that you realize God's got this. He's sovereign. And if you trust Him today, what's the next best thing I can do for this next hour?
Right.
And so I think taking care of yourself, I think going to bed at a good time, making sure you're staying on a routine, as Mike talked about earlier, is so important when things are unknown. And we're in uncharted territory right now.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be different for everybody. I don't think everybody's going to answer that question the same.
Yeah.
And I think there's like 365 fear nots in the Bible. I think something like that. And of course, God doesn't want us to live in fear, and it is an opportunity to trust Him. But I think I want to normalize the anxiety that people would be having through this, because I do think that's normal.
Yeah.
But also, it's a way for us to press into our faith in God and trust in Him. And of course, you might just take it one step at a time. You might figure out one normal thing I'm going to do either today or this week. Maybe I'm going to go to the grocery store. And maybe the next week, instead of just letting your child just go out and just play with anybody, maybe you bring one friend to the house, and just you kind of ease into it a little bit, where hopefully you get a little bit of peace about that. Senior citizens, for them, I really have compassion for them during this time, because I guess I got the white hair over here. Maybe that's a little bit of it, but I think it's going to be important for them not to be isolated.
Yeah.
And whatever they need to do to get out socially, whether that's connecting with somebody else in their community, or even if it's getting on FaceTime or Zoom. But for the senior citizens, I think same thing. Do some things in your normal routine that you used to do, and try to get back into those slowly but surely. And my hope would be, as you do that little by little, you might get more peace about it as you move forward.
Great. Well, Don and Mike, thank you very much for helping us today. You've given us some great biblical wisdom, as you guys at Summit Counseling always do. And for those of you who've been watching this webinar, thank you so much for joining us again today. And we certainly hope that you will tune back in next Tuesday at 2 o'clock. Also, that you will share this webinar on social media posts and let people know about the opportunities for good, sound biblical wisdom through the Summit Counselors here at First Baptist Jackson. Also want you to know that, as we talked about last week, if you would like to talk to one of these counselors, not only will they be glad to set up appointments with you, but they even have the option of being able to do that by telephone or even by Zoom, and have a counseling session that way. So there is help available to you. You do not have to walk through this normal or what's going to be the new normal alone. There are people who are here who will be glad to help you if you will reach out and make that phone call and set up an appointment. Thank you so much again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next Tuesday.